Good evening, everyone, and welcome. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, my name is Sister Maria Pascuzzi. I am the director of Spirit Alive. I understand that tonight we have people from across the United States. We have a guest who's joined us before from India. We have a couple of people from Canada, from the UK, from Australia, and also from Ireland, I think. The people over in Europe might be joining by tomorrow, listening to the video recording. I think it's a little late for them to be up, but welcome everyone. Welcome to Spirit Alive and to the beginning of our winter spring programs. And tonight we are beginning with the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation is this wild and wonderful book. It has seals and symbols and people ingesting things, and it's confusing. And then it has some of the most beautiful parts of scripture, the description of the heavenly, the New Jerusalem coming down, Christ, the Alpha and the Omega. It's just a fabulous book. And I could not think of a better person to be our guide through this than my dear friend and former colleague, Dr. Eugenia Constantinou. Jeannie holds a master's degree in religious studies and from the University of San Diego. And then she went on to get a law degree at Pepperdine University and became a member of the California Bar. But her first love, but not to the exclusion of law, but certainly her first love is theology and scripture. So get this, in short order, after getting her law degree, she got 3 master's degrees: Master of Arts in Practical Theology from the University of San Diego, a Master of Theology from Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology, where she specialized in Orthodox theology and patristics, and in 1998, a Master of Theology from Harvard Divinity School, where she specialized in the New Testament. And then in 2007, she was awarded a PhD from Laval University in Quebec City, Canada. And she did her dissertation on Andros Caesarea and the apocalypse in the ancient church of the East. So we're getting someone who has spent a lot of her life reading this last book of the Christian canon. Jeannie has taught in a number of theology schools. I had, as I said, the good fortune to meet her at the University of San Diego, where she had been teaching biblical studies and early Christianity, a very popular teacher. I had the opportunity to observe her, and I consider her one of the best pedagogues that I've ever seen. So I think we're going to enjoy her. She worked at USD until her retirement just last year, and now she's been able to spend more time writing. She has led Bible studies programs, taught and lectured on the Bible and orthodoxy at parishes, conferences, and retreats. She has a huge following, which she's had for a number of years, of her podcast program on scripture. And when we used to talk about it, she told me a large part of her audience were truckers going back and forth across the United States who listen to podcasts. So that's a wonderful thing she does. She is married to Father Costa, who is a Greek Orthodox priest, and she is, as she says simply, to her son Christopher, Mom. So it gives me a great honor and joy to bring this friend of mine who I think will give us wonderful insights about the book of Revelation. So as we did in the past, Jeannie will talk and do a presentation, leave some room for questions. There's one announcement that I want to make. Keep your mics off until the end, then you can put your mics on and ask questions. And remember, you're in front of the camera. So if you don't wish to be seen with your curlers or whatever, you can turn your camera off. But please remember, you're in front of your camera. Also, if you'd like to have words generated, if it's easier for you to read along with the speaker, please press the CC button on your screen. Jeannie, it's all yours. Thank you. Welcome to Spirit Alive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sister Maria. It's so good to be with you. I'm very happy to be part of this wonderful program that you spend so much time and love, and to allow ordinary people, regardless of where they live in the world, to listen to and become engaged with theology. I think it's absolutely wonderful. So thank you very much for that. And of course, the book of Revelation is a very popular subject with a lot of people. And thank you for the invitation to talk about it. So welcome everybody to 6 weeks that we're going to be talking about this very extraordinary book, very unusual book in the Bible for a lot of reasons that we're going to talk about beginning tonight. But in addition to this, you should understand that because it is such a complex book, has so many images, so many symbols, so many issues, that we're never going to be able to answer everything that there is, and we're not going to have time to go even chapter by chapter through the book. So I'm going to, as we proceed, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my approach and about we're going to talk about what we're going to be doing in the next few weeks so that you know what to expect. And I will definitely leave time at the end for questions. So I'm glad that Sister reminded you to turn off your microphone, because sometimes there are ambient noises that come up in the background, and that then we have to stop and wait for the person to realize that their microphone is on and turn it off, etc. So we have to remember these things, but also I'm going to be talking about some issues that maybe you haven't heard discussed about the book of Revelation, such as its place in the canon. How did it end up in the New Testament? Because it wasn't always received well. So at any rate, let's go ahead and get started. I normally don't teach with a lot of PowerPoints, because we spend all day, pretty much every day, a lot of us, looking at screens. And I really prefer to have a face-to-face encounter. But because of the book of Revelation, when it comes to this, it's even though it's a book, we visualize images in our head. So it is, and it really lends itself to this kind of a thing. So we are going to be using a lot of images, especially tonight, in which I'm going to begin by talking to you, after we get through some preliminary stuff, talking to you about apocalyptic literature. The book of Revelation is not unique. There were many other books that were written, or portions of books that were written with this kind of style that we call apocalyptic. And I'm going to spend tonight's lesson showing you how apocalyptic literature works, okay? And why it was so very effective. So first I'm going to do is get to the PowerPoint and do a little screen share here, which I practiced, and tell it to share. And hopefully you'll all be seeing that. I'm clicking on share, there we go. Okay, hopefully everybody's seeing that. I'm going to try to get to the little slideshow, and there we are. Okay. Okay, so that's my website, drjeannie.com, and we're talking here tonight about the book of Revelation, and we're going to begin with this introduction to apocalyptic literature. So when we hear the word apocalypse, what do we think? Of course, we think of doom and destruction and fantastic imagery and things like this, but mostly we think about the end of the world, right? We think about the plagues that are going to afflict the world in tremendous destruction, this type of a thing, some kind of catastrophe, let's say. Now, then the question is, why are you taking this course, okay? Of course, you're curious about the book of Revelation, but a lot of people are taking it, or they want to learn about it because they're hoping to learn about the end of the world. When is it going to happen? How is it going to happen? And the problem is nobody can tell you that. So what I'm going to be doing today is talking to you about the truth about the book of Revelation. The purpose of this course is to give you a historical grounding and a spiritual insight into the book of Revelation, not to manipulate you, deceive you, or mislead you. And that's what a lot of people have done over the centuries, especially in recent times, with these fantastic claims, people who insist that they can interpret the Bible and predict when the end will come and exactly how it will come. And people spend lifetimes investing a lot of time into coming up with some kind of a scenario of the end. And the fact is that people who do this are very, very sincere, usually. Usually they're deeply committed Christians. They're very well-intentioned. They're very sincere. And when you question them, well, how can you be sure? And they'll say, I've been studying this my whole life and blah, 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 blah. But they're also absolutely wrong. Okay, so they can be very sincere and be completely wrong. And we know they're wrong. They're always wrong, because being sincere doesn't make you correct. Doesn't, even if you spend your lifetime studying this book, that doesn't mean that you know anything really at all about how the end will come. Because, in fact, history has proven that every single person who ever believed they could foretell the end times has been wrong. And the Lord told us that no one would know, right? So the purpose of this course is to tell you the truth about Revelation in a very sober manner, to give you a thoughtful, intelligent, historical, spiritual, reliable explanation of this book. And I know that you might be a little bit disappointed because I was when I first took a course like this, because I was hoping to get some kind of insight about the end of the world. And it doesn't seem very interesting once you find out the truth that nobody really can predict the end. But the fact is, what you receive instead is more satisfying, it's more interesting, it's more meaningful than somebody who tells you they can give you the keys to understanding the secrets behind the book of Revelation. So in spite of your possible disappointment at the fact that I'm not going to tell you about how the end is going to happen exactly, not that we know nothing, but we can't predict it. And we can't even necessarily give a blow-by-blow scenario about it. And as time goes on through the course, I'm going to show you why that's the case, okay? So hopefully you'll still stick around and pay attention to what we say. So what are we going to be talking about in this course tonight? In session 1, we're going to be talking about apocalyptic literature. What is the book of Revelation? Why was it written? What's its purpose? And frankly, why does that even matter? And that goes a long way toward explaining why people can't use it to predict the end, all right? We're going to talk about tonight, why is it so strange? And then what is prophecy? How does prophecy function? How was Revelation interpreted in the early church? Who wrote the book? And why is there controversy about that? How was it that it came to be accepted into the New Testament canon? Because we don't really know too much, or a lot of people don't know too much about how the New Testament came together as a collection. Because you might say, well, those are the books that the apostles wrote, for example. But there were many, many other books that were around in the 2nd century, certainly, but even in the 1st century, there were Christian writings that did not get accepted into the New Testament. So why is it that Revelation was accepted, and actually it had a kind of a bumpy road toward acceptance? So we're going to talk about that too, because I think it's rather interesting. We won't spend too much time on it, but we will discuss it. What is the historical context of the book? This is the single most important thing you're going to learn in this course, the historical context. But we will also talk about the general flow of the book. How is it structured? What kinds of things how do we divide the book? Because Bible scholars always divide books and to look at the structure of it. And it has its own structure too. Then we will talk about the prologue, the opening vision. This is when John has his vision of Christ. And then the first 2 chapters after that, those are chapters 2 and 3, are the letters to the 7 churches, which I know is also something that you hear sometimes in church. It's part of the Catholic tradition to read from the book of Revelation in church, including from the letters of the 7 churches. So, and those are among the most used useful parts, easily understandable parts, but it's key toward also understanding the purpose of the book. We won't look at every single letter, but we'll look at a couple of them. Then we're going to take a look at the things that people are really curious about and the key themes and scenes in Revelation. The throne room scene, this is where the Lamb appears. The woman clothed with the sun, another very important symbol. The dragon, the beasts, 666, those are all, they all appear in chapter 13. The dragon appears in 12, and then also he's in 13. And Armageddon, what's that all about? And then after, at the end in chapter 20, there's judgment. There's a reference to the 1,000 years of reign with Christ. What about that? How did the church understand that? And of course, it ends, as Sister Maria had mentioned, with an image of the heavenly Jerusalem. So we'll talk a little bit about that too. But I do also want to give a little bit of time on the last day of the class to talk about the lessons of Revelation for our times that I think are universal and worth pondering. Okay, so my approach now, Dr. Maria mentioned that I'm a Greek Orthodox Christian. I'm married to an Orthodox priest. So the reason why I'm mentioning this is so that you will not expect a lot of citations of modern Bible scholars. Not that I didn't read them, but my dissertation was about Revelation in the early church of the East. Now, I'm also going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about how Revelation was interpreted in the West, in the Latin side of the church, and also in the East. It started, the church was Greek, and then people started speaking Latin in all of Italy and Gaul and Spain and North Africa and Britain. And they developed a different tradition of apocalypse interpretation. I'm going to be sticking with the East because it's older, okay? And that's where my area of expertise is. So I want to tell you a little bit about the early interpretation of Revelation, but not exclusively about the early interpretation. The early interpretation is best for the spirituality of the book. And the Orthodox are always all about the early church fathers and early apostolic tradition and maintaining these kinds of traditions. So what about modern scholars and their contributions? In fact, modern scholars have helped tremendously in our understanding of the book of Revelation. Modern scholarship has helped a lot because we know more today about the meanings of some of the symbols than people did initially. Well, not initially, when it was written, people understood it. But after that, 200, 300 years after that, the meanings of many of the symbols seem to have been lost. And modern scholars have given us a lot of insight into the meanings of some of these symbols. So we're going to be combining the best of modern scholarship, but also the spiritual insights and also some very good critical analysis that we received from early church fathers. Okay, so we'll be using both. But there is a difference in mentality between the Christian East and the Christian West. And because I'm coming from the Eastern tradition, I'm going to be following that, and that is going to be the primary thrust of the interpretation of the older interpretations. But I will definitely let you know about some of the other famous Latin interpreters as well, okay? So can we have confidence in what was said about Revelation centuries ago? Because when it comes to the history of the book, we actually know some things about the history of the book. Can we have confidence in it? Yes, we can, because there is a continual stream of tradition that has been maintained about this book. And sometimes it's not easy for people to understand that, but it's very important that we realize that the church, and I think you all know this, but sometimes we forget because people act as though we're something like the Mormons who say, well, the early church disappeared and then it suddenly appeared again when Joseph Smith, John the Baptist and James and John and Peter appeared to Joseph Smith, something like that, that the church stopped all of a sudden. It just disappeared. It fell off the face of the earth, or it just disappeared. We don't believe that. There was a continual connection to the early church. And so the first Christians in Asia Minor, to whom this book was directed, lived in that world, the Greco-Roman world, the Roman Empire of the first century in Asia Minor. They understood their world. They knew about the author and his connection to them, and they passed this information along. And we actually have quite a significant, we could say, important historical support for authorship and the communities that received this book. So the line of communication between us, our forefathers in the faith, those first Christians who received this book, who knew this book, has never been broken. There's a continuous living Christian tradition, not only in the writing, but also in a lived reality. So I want to start by mentioning St. John on the island of Patmos. Now, and I'm telling you this, and I'm reminding you about the fact that there have been Christians in these areas since the beginning, since the first century. Obviously, the very, very beginning is Jerusalem. But within a few years, the church has spread all over the Roman Empire. And there were Christians in all of these places. So St. Paul established so many churches in Greece and also in Asia Minor, and John was affiliated with the church in Asia Minor. So the fact is, those places had a church at that time, and there are still churches there. So today, there are Christians living on Patmos, where John was in exile, when he wrote this book. So if you go to Patmos today, they will point to places where John did his ministry. And sometimes we say, well, because our logical brain gets involved in this, and it says, well, can we really know? And how can anybody be sure? And blah, blah, blah. So I just want to tell you a little quick story. I went to Patmos. I'd been dying to go for a long time. Obviously, I've been studying this book for a long time. Finally, a few years ago, maybe about 5 years ago, I went there with my husband. And this island is not easy to get to because it's very, very small. And it doesn't have an airport because it's only 4 miles from north to south. And it's shaped kind of like an hourglass. Right in the center is where the port is. It's shaped like an hourglass like this. And so we got to Patmos finally. You have to fly to some other island and then take a ferry to get there. And it's absolutely wonderful, not only spectacularly beautiful, because you can see the sea from practically every place, but it's a deeply religious island where there are little churches and monasteries and shrines everywhere, everywhere. So we were constantly stopping and trying to get into some monastery or church or something like this. We were driving along a highway up very high along the side of a mountain or a big hill, and we looked down in the ravine below, and there was this tiny little chapel. We couldn't figure out what it was doing there because there was no road that was leading to it. So we said, this is so strange. So we end up going and asking somebody later, we saw this little chapel, and people, because this is a very small island, everybody pretty much knows everybody else. So we saw this little chapel that was the bottom of this deep ravine, and there was no road. And they said, oh, that's a chapel, one of 2 places where St. John was baptizing people when he was here on Patmos. And it's a very tiny, very, humble little chapel. And then they showed us the other place. So we said, well, we have to go back to this place. We have to go back to this chapel because there was a creek there. You see, there was water there. So it was right by this creek. So here's what happened. We went down there. We found some dirt road not too far away. We started going down the dirt road. We ended up at this parking lot of a mechanic an automobile mechanic. We thought, this can't be right. This is Greece, okay? This is Greece. This can't be right. So we got out and said, how do you get to the church? And it said, oh, you just go down this path. So we went down the path and it was locked. So unfortunately, we didn't see it on the inside. I took pictures because there was glass above at the door, but we didn't get on the inside. But afterwards, somebody said, oh, it was locked. Oh, they keep the key above the door. This is so typical, okay, of Greece. We went to the other place where St. John had been baptized, and that was near the main town. And there, somebody next door had the key to the church, and we went into this church. That was on the spot of this place. But my point is this: these traditions and what happened at different places on the island are very alive. And before we poo-poo them and say, well, somebody just made it up along the way, we have to be very careful about that, because people remembered these things because there was a continuous Christian presence. And a lot of people on the island are named John or Joanna, Ioannis or Ioanna. And a lot of people are named Christodoulos, which is the name of the monk who established the monastery of St. John about 1,000 years ago on the island. So it's a very pious island, and they're very devoted to St. John and preserving this tradition. Now, on my screenshot, I mentioned after John on Patmos, Lazarus on Cyprus. And I want to tell you about that so you can understand the power of oral tradition of people who live in a place, generation after generation after generation. My husband grew up on the island of Cyprus. It was a British colony at the time when he was born. He was born in 1948. They didn't get their independence till the 1960s. It was a British colony. And the Cypriots are very proud of the fact that St. Lazarus went to Cyprus after the resurrection, and he lived there, and he became the Bishop of Cyprus. So this has been passed along in the island forever. And the British used to say to the Cypriots, there's no proof that Lazarus was ever on the island. There's no proof, there's no proof, there's no proof. Okay, there's no proof. Well, guess what? About the year in the 800s, there was a Byzantine emperor who came and built a big church in Larnaca, which is a large city on the southernmost part of Cyprus. And he built it because he wanted to take the relics of Lazarus back to Constantinople. And he knew that the people wouldn't want to part with the relics of St. Lazarus. He built this church there. It's still there from the 1800s, but not 800s. Now, that church had a fire in the 1970s, and they had to dig underneath the church because there was structural damage. They had to prop it up. And when they were digging underneath the church, guess what they found right under the altar? The sarcophagus of Lazarus. And inside the sarcophagus, a wooden box. And they were both labeled Lazarus, the 4-day friend of Christ. And inside were the relics, or some of the relics. They had apparently not taken all of them back to Constantinople. So it turns out that church was built on top of a cemetery, just like St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. And just like the altar of St. Peter's is built directly over the grave of St. Peter, so is the Church of St. Lazarus built on that, even though there was no proof, and the British were very dismissive of this. How did the Cypriots know that Lazarus was buried there? There was literally no proof until like 1979 or 78, whenever this fire happened, 1975. They had no proof, but the proof was discovered. So, we should be very reluctant to be dismissive about these oral histories, because they were remembered and passed on, because these things were important to the people who lived there. So that's why we have a strong attachment to oral tradition. Not that all oral traditions are correct, but we shouldn't be quick to dismiss them. So let's talk about the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation is unique in the Bible for many reasons. It is the only apocalyptic book in the Bible. Now, we have apocalyptic passages in the Bible. Parts of Daniel are apocalyptic. Parts of other prophets are apocalyptic. Parts of even the Gospels, synoptic Gospels, are apocalyptic when Jesus talks about the signs of the end times. But this is the only book that is almost 100% apocalyptic in style. It's also, excuse me, the only book of the Bible which has two names, Revelation and the Apocalypse. Now that's because Revelation is the Latin name and Apocalypse is the Greek name. Revelation and Apocalypse both mean the same thing. It means to reveal. That's why it's called Revelation. Or apocalypse means to uncover, to reveal something, to uncover it, which is a little bit ironic because the book hardly seems to be a revelation. It seems to be so mystical that we can't really understand what it's saying. But that's why it's known by two names. It's also the only book of prophecy in the New Testament. Obviously, Jesus makes prophecy, or he makes a prophecy here and there. But this is the only book that is actually prophetic. And it's also unique in other ways. It's the only book that directs people to read it, and it blesses the reader, and it blesses the people who are listening. Because what used to happen is people would get together and one person would read out loud and the others would listen. So it says, blessed is the one who reads and those who hear the words in this book. So it's the only book that says, read this, and then it blesses the people who read it. It's also the only book of the Bible which was accepted in Scripture, then rejected, and then accepted again. And this was primarily in the East. It didn't have such a bumpy road to a canonical acceptance in the Latin West. So here's what we're going to discuss tonight. What is apocalyptic literature? We're going to talk about this primarily. Can it be used to predict how or when the end of the world will take place? Why is Revelation so strange, and why was it written in the way it was? And I've had people so many times say to me, well, what did John really see? What really happened to John? And we just can't answer that. We know that he had an experience, and this is how he chose to express it. But the question is, why did he use this symbolic language? And it's easy to say, well, that was a style. Sure, it's a style, but why choose this style instead of something else? So this here is, we have a number of apocalypses and books on apocalyptic manuscripts, books on the revelation of John that were illuminated with pictures. And here is one of them, taken from one of these apocalypse, ancient early manuscripts or medieval manuscripts. And here you see the beast of the sea, giving his authority to the beast of the land. You see the 7 heads and the 10 horns. So here he is on the sea. We'll talk about that, but that will be in the future. All right, so our book, the book of Revelation, or the Apocalypse of St. John, is among a number of books that were written in a literary style called apocalyptic. So we say the apocalypse as though it's the only one, but actually it really isn't the only one. And there was another apocalypse that was very popular in the early church, and that was the Apocalypse of St. Peter, but it didn't get into the canon because it wasn't really by Peter. But it was a very popular apocalypse. Now, this genre of writing, this style of writing, was very popular, especially among Jews, from about 200 BC until about 280. So this is because it had to do with persecution. Most apocalyptic books are, they appeal to people under persecution, and they're written by people suffering persecution. So, of course, the Jews at this time were under occupation by Greek rulers in this early period in the 200 BC the 170s, 160s. They're fighting against Greek rulers. They're fighting for their independence. That's the Maccabean War. And then, of course, they were under the Romans. They won their independence for a brief period of time. Then they were under the Romans, and they were suffering a lot under the Romans. And then they fought a war against the Romans, and they lost. And of course, during the first century, also the church is born, and then the church begins to experience persecution. And so, because the church came out of Judaism, and this style of writing was well known to early Christians, they also begin to write in this apocalyptic style. So that's why it continues, not even though it begins under the Jews, it begins in the BC period under the Jews, it is continued by Christians. So because Christianity emerged from Judaism, the Christians inherited and also adopted this form of expression for some books, okay, especially for people suffering persecution, which of course the early church was for a long time. So what are the characteristics of apocalyptic writing? There are two main characteristics. I should have added a third. I'll tell you the third one. There's a specific worldview. There's a way of understanding the world or thinking about the world that we'll talk about in a moment. There's a very pronounced and specific literary style, which you can already figure out. It's full of symbolic numbers and colors and things like this. And the third thing, which I should have put down, is that apocalypses often have some kind of literary guide. There's some literary figure in there who's a guide who helps to explain to the person who's having the experience, in this case, John, the seer, S-E-E-R, they explain what the seer is seeing. In other words, there's a sort of an angelic interpreter. We see this in the Apocalypse of John as well. We have angelic interpreters. We have Jesus sometimes, Christ, explains to John the meaning of certain symbols. Also, there are elders, like in the throne room scene. The Lamb appears, or before the Lamb appears, there's a scroll with 7 seals. No one is worthy to open the scroll. So John starts to weep. And then an elder says, don't weep. Look, the Lamb of Judah, the Lion of Judah, he's coming and he's going to open the scroll. So we see this a couple of occasions. Angelic interpreters, elders interpreting, in this case, the elders who are before the throne of God, and others who are explaining sometimes what he is seeing. So that's also very much part of the apocalyptic style. Okay, so let's talk about the worldview. The worldview of apocalyptic literature is this: God's people are suffering unjustly, unjust persecution. The world is under the control of Satan, who operates through governments and institutions to oppress the people of God. The Satan, of course, wants to destroy them. But God will grant victory to his people, to the righteous people, by intervening to save them, or by rewarding them after they died, by basically bringing them into the kingdom of heaven, okay, if they're faithful. So there were apocalyptic groups in the time of Christ, and the most famous are the people who wrote the scrolls at Qumran. Most people think that those are the Essenes. So they were very apocalyptic. They believed that the end of the world was coming. They had documents that talked about this cataclysmic war between the sons of light, that's them, the people who were part of this very strict, almost monastic Jewish community, the sons of light, and then the rest of the world, which is the sons of darkness. They believed there would be this big catastrophe, this big battle, and of course they would be given victory from God. Of course, that didn't happen. But if you look at this, you can see within it the seeds and the sort of commonalities between this mentality and many other religious groups who have felt or identified themselves as people who are disfavored. So you see this, for example, with the Seventh-day Adventists, who are very apocalyptic. They spend a lot of time talking about the book of Revelation, and they believe that because they worship on Saturday, they believe that the Christian day of worship should be Saturday, not Sunday. They firmly believe that one day the government will forbid the worship of the Lord on Saturdays, and they will be persecuted. After them, and very significantly influenced by them, was Charles Taze Russell, who started the Jehovah's Witnesses. They are also very apocalyptic in their worldview. Everybody else belongs to the kingdom of Satan, and we're the only true people of God. Everybody's going to persecute us, or they are already persecuting us, etc. So there's this mentality of us and them. It's a very striking dichotomy of black and white. You're either with us or you're outside and you belong to the devil, okay? So that's very characteristic of apocalyptic. And it's done partly, at least by these groups, to keep people within the group, okay, and not going outside of the group. And this is why also we've seen a number of cult leaders use this type of mentality. And a lot of us remember the Waco incident where this fellow called himself David Koresh was saying that he was predicting the end of the world and had a lot to do with the conflagration that destroyed his compound and killed a lot of people. So he predicted that the government was going to come after them and all this. And of course, people believed that he really was a prophet because of that. So you see the mentality. So the first characteristic of apocalyptic is this particular worldview. So eventually, God and the good will triumph over the devil and evil. But in the meantime, what's the main point? The main point of the writing and the main point of the book of Revelation? God's people must remain faithful and patient no matter what, okay? So let's talk about the literary style. The literary style of apocalyptic, it describes a glimpse into heaven or into the future. And heavenly guides explain what is seen. So I put it there, but I put it under literary style. And of course, it is characterized especially by symbolic numbers, symbolic animals, symbolic colors, and cosmic signs. You know, the stars all fall from the sky, the moon turns red as blood, the sun goes dark. There's a number 666, a number 7, number 3.5 years, or 1,462 days, and all these could do 1,260 days. So all kinds of the number 12, the number 144, these are all symbolic. Colors are symbolic, the color red, the color white, color black. They're all very symbolic. So now I want to show you how those symbols operate. We're surrounded by symbols every day, and we know them very well. We don't really have to think about what they mean or how to interpret them. We just naturally absorb the message. That's what happened when John wrote his book to these 7 churches of Asia Minor. They didn't have to sit and decode it the way we are trying to do, trying to understand it. They understood it because they understood the symbols. And so I'm now visually going to give you symbols so that you can understand how symbols work, all right? So symbols have meaning. So here we see this. The color and the shape suggests that you're supposed to stop. Even though it doesn't say stop, if you saw this on the road, I think you would stop, okay? You would expect yourself to stop. So what does this mean? Well, I can't read Arabic, but I think it means stop. So some symbols are just informational, right? You think you see a parking space and you zoom up to get it and, oh, it's handicapped, can't park there. Or maybe you have a handicap placard and you say, oh, good, I can park here. But it's strictly informational. What about this? Do you recognize this? This is a kind of universal symbol now in America for the library. A little person reading a book. Now, sometimes you have to have special training to understand a symbol. And here we have musical symbols. There's a treble clef, there's a bass clef, there's a sharp, there's a flat. There's a 16th note, an 8th note, a quarter note, a whole note, a couple kinds of rests. I know that because I know music, but if you don't, then you say, well, there's a line with a round thing at the bottom of it. This one has a dot after it. You don't know what that means, but everything here has a meaning. And for people who know music, they know exactly what to do when they see this symbol. Okay, so sometimes you have to have training to understand a symbol. But every child knows what this means, at least every child in America. They know what this means. It means French fries and sometimes a place to play. So some symbols are very ubiquitous, and this is one of them. There are other symbols that are also understood internationally. This, of course, is the Nike swoosh. And if you're going overseas and you want to take a present to someone, they might ask you to bring them some sneakers, and they don't want, Walmart brand sneakers. They want something with a brand like this. They'll want Nike, and they know it. They'll tell you about it, right? So this is the kind of thing that is, again, an international brand. Other symbols are known only in a particular culture. I don't think that other people around the world would recognize these symbols. These are political symbols in the United States. Canadians might, because they see some of our programming, but I don't think, maybe Mexicans, but I'm not sure. But in the rest of the world, they would know that these two symbols represent American political parties. This symbol first appeared in the 1970s when people began recycling, and this is the symbol for recycling. And then, of course, we have this one, the symbol for windows. Everybody knows that one. Some symbols are very old. This, of course, this symbol, the symbol of the Christian faith, wasn't always a positive symbol. It was a very negative symbol because of what the cross stood for. But of course, for Christians, it's a holy symbol. It's a beautiful symbol. So whether or not we understand a symbol depends upon our age, our culture, and our exposure to that symbol. So when we see this NRA, now today in the United States, NRA usually means the National Rifle Association. They're a gun lobby. But if you're of my parents' generation, you would look at this and you would not think guns. You would think about one of the programs of Franklin Delano Roosevelt during the Great Depression, the National Recovery Act, putting people to work. So sometimes, now this is not so much a symbol, this is so much more about the letters. But here's another symbol. This symbol really began in World War II. Women and men, families would hang a symbol in the window showing how many members of the family were serving in the army with a blue star. And if the star was embroidered in gold, this meant that the person had died, So the idea of a gold star mother or gold star father, this is something that this pretty much disappeared. Recently, people have started using that again, but in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s, you didn't hear the term gold star mother, gold star father. And recently it came back. What about this? This was initially only the domain of teenagers and college students. And as soon as their parents began flocking to Facebook, the teens left and went to Instagram or someplace else where they could be a bit more anonymous. So this is, again, very widespread throughout the world, Facebook. Symbols can also change in meaning. So when I was a kid, Apple was the Beatles record label. This was the symbol of the Beatles record label. Now, of course, when you say Apple, nobody thinks about the Beatles. They think about this computer company. A symbol can have a different meaning depending upon how or where it appears. So for the Jewish people, they see the Star of David. It's a very important symbol to them. It represents their Jewish faith. It also represents the modern state of Israel. But does it have a positive meaning if it looks like this? Of course, this is the patch that was that Jews were forced to wear in Nazi Germany. So the symbol is the same, but now it has a very different connotation, doesn't it? It's a frightening image, especially for Jewish people seeing that image. So symbols evoke a response because they have a meaning. And the meaning is so powerful that you don't even need words. This is why I'm showing you these things, because even though in the book of Revelation we are using verbal symbols, nonetheless, they evoke an image within our mind, and it operates like a visual image. So symbols evoke a response because they have meaning. And sometimes the difference is not where or how, the meaning is different because not where or how it's presented, but the person who is viewing it. They might have a negative history with that symbol. So for example, Stars and Stripes, if you're an American, you see the flag, you're proud. In other parts of the world, this is a very negative symbol, especially now where people are identifying us with the Israeli bombing of Palestine, right? So right now, for most Americans, this, I think, is still a very positive symbol, but not always. Now, what about this? When you have the stars, it's called the stars and the bars, stars and bars. For many Southerners, this was a popular symbol. It was a symbol of Southern pride, of their culture, of their heritage, but not for everyone, because for many African Americans, that was identified with slavery, with oppression, and it was very offensive to them. So this was something that was very difficult for white Southerners to comprehend and to allow to go, because the stars and bars were on part of the flag of many Southern states. And we know that recently they've been doing away with that because people are beginning to realize that it's just too disturbing to African Americans. So there are symbols which are so associated with a particular idea that they can never have a neutral meaning. And here's one. This symbol always evokes a very strong negative reaction, unless you're a Nazi, of course. And there are, unfortunately, still some of those. But whenever we see this symbol, it's so graphic, it's so stark. Even those of us who didn't live through the war, I'm too young, I didn't live through World War II, but we see movies about Nazi Germany, and we see this symbol everywhere in big stadiums and other places. It was flying over, even in something like The Sound of Music, they put up the Nazi flag and this kind of a thing. It has a very strong negative reaction for us, even for those of us who didn't experience this period in history. So what does all of this have to do with the book of Revelation? The symbols of Revelation had a specific meaning in the early church. They had a meaning to the original audience that received the book 1900 years ago. That seems very obvious, but what I'm trying to say is this: if we wish to really understand the apocalypse, we have to learn what its symbolic language meant to the people who received the book originally. And when I was talking about that, the helpfulness of modern scholarship, this is where one way that modern scholarship has been very helpful, because we know a lot more today about first century Asia Minor than a lot of people who lived even not pretty long time ago. So if we want to understand the book of Revelation, we have to understand the meaning of the symbols in that culture. No, that should be obvious. I shouldn't have to explain this, but we can't simply choose the meanings out of our imagination, because this is what a lot of people do today. Or they think that, well, this represents rock and roll, or this is the atom bomb, or this is, President Biden or President Trump or something of that nature. We cannot imagine that God has given us some kind of unique insight and then we decide what the symbol means, because that's wrong. As we just went through all those symbols, if I took the Nike swoosh and say, hey, that reminds me of a boomerang, maybe that's the symbol of Australia, that doesn't make it the symbol of Australia. That's just my idea. And it's completely wrong. So for example, we have the McDonald's symbol here. Everybody knows that that's a symbol for McDonald's. But what if 2,000 years from now, archaeologists are uncovering ruins where they find the McDonald's sign, and they say, "Oh, it maybe this is Mexico, or this represents Mississippi, or this is the Methodist Church." Would they be correct? Okay, no, they're not correct just because that's what they think. That's what they presume. What I'm trying to say is we have to go back in time to the first century to understand what the symbols meant to the people to whom the book was originally written. If we wish to understand it correctly, because the Bible is not meant to be interpreted according to what I think it is, we don't open it up and then say, here's what it means to me. Who the heck cares what it means to me? What matters is, first of all, what did it mean to John? What was John trying to convey to that audience? Because if we understand what he was conveying to that audience, we can apply it to us. So it has an impact. It has a meaning for us, but not a meaning that we just pull out of our imagination. Because John is the inspired author, not us. Yes, a reader can be inspired and receive insight, but most of the time we don't. So we cannot properly interpret Revelation without an understanding of the historical context of the apocalypse. And the people who have ignored that and simply interpreted according to their own opinion, their own imagination, without considering its original meaning, misuse the book and they distort the book. And this is how cults are born. This is why people follow these cult leaders. So there are people who interpret these symbols. They don't really care what the actual meaning is, what the historical meaning is, and they're either ignorant, they're sincere but ignorant, or they're outright charlatans. And both have been part of Christian history through the years, okay? People intentionally interpret Revelation in the wrong way, or sincerely are misguided, and they frighten, deceive, or manipulate other people. So here's a picture of a van, because a few years ago, well, now 2024, 13 years ago, there was a fellow who had a big, wide following on a Protestant radio network called Family Radio. His name was Brother Harold Camping, and he predicted that the end of the world, that Jesus would return on May 21st, 2011. And he was insistent upon it. I used to flip through the radio and listen to sometimes listen to this Protestant station, sometimes at the Catholic station. And occasionally, as a matter of fact, I was driving to one of the Catholic parishes in the area, and would put on the radio. And right at that time, as I was driving up to give us a series of lectures at this parish up in Del Mar, which is like a 30 minutes drive from here, I would get part of Brother Harold Camping's Bible study, and people were calling in and they were saying, "But Brother Camping, what if you're wrong?" And what did he say? "I've been studying the Bible 70 years, and I'm telling you I'm not wrong. Jesus is coming back, May 21st, 2011. So I was hearing this about 2 years before it happened, and I couldn't wait until May 22nd, 2011 to find out what he would say. Now, the popular media got wind of this about a month before the date, okay? But here's what happened. People, because he had, this is a radio network that's worldwide, he had thousands of people who listened to him. People literally quit their jobs, stopped paying their mortgages, racked up big credit card bills because they were convinced that Jesus was coming back. And that was going to be the end of the world. And they would be raptured up to heaven. And then there would be this chaos on earth where there would be the horrible destruction and things like this. So people really believe this. Thousands of people believe this and did this. And he said, we have to get the word out. We have to tell people to repent. All the while, he believed in predestination. And people would call him up and say, "But Brother Camping, you say that some people are destined to be saved and some are destined to be lost. So why should we tell them to repent? Why are you telling people to go around, spread the message that Jesus is coming back if it doesn't make any difference?" but he would ignore that obvious, conflict there in his reasoning and would just keep repeating over and over and over. Well, in case you don't know what happened, I will tell you. On May 22nd, after Jesus did not return, silence, and he did not appear for a week. And then he came out of his house and said, well, Jesus did come back, but he came back invisibly. And the real end of the world will happen 6 months from now on October 21st, 2011. So that pushed the can down the road for 6 months. And what happened? On October 21st, when Jesus didn't come back, they said, well, what do you think now, Brother Camping? And he said, well, I guess I don't know when Jesus is coming back. That's exactly right. None of us knows. But this is one of the vans that people were driving to encourage people to repent, which I don't know why, since they believed in predestination. I love this picture. I'm so glad I took it. This billboard was down the hill from the University of San Diego, and I believe Sister Maria was teaching there at the same time as this. Look, it says Judgment Day, and I love it says it's telling people to repent, cry mightily unto God, and it says the Bible guarantees it. You see this? I'm circling it with my cursor. The Bible guarantees it that Jesus is coming back May 21st, 2011. There you go. Of course, it didn't happen. And of course, most people ignored it, but a lot of people did not. And they were seriously harmed by following him. So let's talk about Revelation as prophecy. Revelation is prophecy. It also has a future fulfillment as well as a message for us today. But the purpose of Revelation was never to serve as a roadmap to predict the end of the world. And when people try to use it in that way, they are misusing it. And you can be guaranteed that they are 100% wrong. Revelation cannot be used to predict when the end times will come, okay? Here's why. The purpose of Revelation was never to be used to predict the end of the world, okay? And by the way, there's no rapture in Revelation either. So there's no rapture in the early belief in the early church, and there's nothing like that in the book of Revelation. It's actually the opposite. But you have to recognize that the two most important things that you need to remember about interpreting the Bible are, first, the context of everything you're reading. There's a literary context and a historical context. The literary context means, what did the person say or write, like St. Paul, before he made this verse that you're talking about? What did he say before? What did he say after? What did he say elsewhere in his writings? There's a context, a literary context, and there's a historical context. Why did Paul write this book? What was going on in the community, let's say, of Corinth at the time? Why did John write this book? What was going on in Asia Minor at the time? So context is key. We all know what it means to take something out of context. It's distorted. Did you know that there's a law in England against taking statements of people and using them out of context? When it comes to things like movies and advertising, they have very strict rules in England about on advertising. You can't mislead people as easily in advertising in England as you can in America. For example, if there's a really bad movie and somebody says, let's say somebody from the New York Times says, this movie was so bad, it was unbelievable. And so, of course, nobody wants to, the makers of the movie, they still want to make money. So they take the word unbelievable and they put it in their ad. So-and-so, New York Times says, unbelievable. So that people will see the movie. That's against the law in England. Here we have freedom of the press, right? Freedom of expression. But in England, you can't do that because it's taking something out of context. It's misusing it. So the very first thing we have to learn, if we're going to study the Bible, any book of the Bible, is the context, the literary context and the historical context. And secondly, the purpose. the scopos. And early fathers of the church all spoke about this when they were interpreting the Bible. What was the purpose of the book or the passage? Because if the purpose of the book disagrees with your conclusion, then you can be certain that your conclusion is wrong. Okay? So, for example, if you're using your book, the book of Revelation, to predict when the end of the world is going to happen, or to say that some people are going to be spared from the tribulations of the end because they're going to be raptured up, you can be sure that that person is wrong, because the purpose of the book was never to give a roadmap or signs or to be decoded to determine when the end of the world is going to come, you see? So, though that's what we have to remember. All right, so the purpose of the revelation was never designed for that. So we begin with this premise. No author writes a book he believes will not be understood, because there are people who say, well, nobody understood this book until I came along and I decoded it. Now I can tell you exactly what's going to happen and what this means. Somebody like John or anybody, nobody writes a book that no one's going to understand. So John wrote a book that he wanted people to understand, and he expected this book to be understood by its original recipient, okay? The author knew that his audience would understand it, and they did understand it. We're the ones who have difficulty, okay? It wasn't written so that we could decode it later. It wasn't intended to be an enigma or a conundrum to the original audience that only we could understand, okay? But what happened was, over time, the meaning of the symbols was lost because the culture changed. So we may not understand everything in the book, but the first Christians did. And so the chances today that somebody predicting the end of the world will be correct is impossible, okay? But people still try, like Harold Camping. That wasn't that long ago, and he had a lot of people following him. So why do people still try to use Revelation to predict the end? First of all, spiritual pride. They believe that they have special insight. They want to feel important. There are people like that. They want to manipulate people, David Koresh and others, okay? And also, there's nothing to do, because there are people who say, well, I'm already saved. There's nothing to do but wait for Jesus to come back. So they put all of their efforts into that. So what is the teaching of the church about this? We believe the Lord, who said in the scriptures, no one knows the day or the hour, and it will come as a thief in the night, right? At a time that we do not expect. And anyhow, I'm gonna run out of time, so I'll keep on going. So what do we understand? Whatever we really need to know, whatever Christ wanted us to know, he taught very clearly and directly. He wouldn't have left us to guess about anything important. And he believed it would be harmful for us to know the time of the end, which is why he did not disclose it. And so we should stop looking for it. And I know that's not part of the Catholic tradition or the Orthodox tradition to be trying to predict the end. So let's talk about Revelation. Why it was written like this? Because it was part of the Jewish tradition, apocalyptic, and as part of the early years of the church. John was functioning as a prophet, and many of the symbols of Revelation are inspired by prophecies of the Old Testament. There's a lot of commonalities: two witnesses, lampstands, olive trees, and different symbols of Revelation are similar, but they're not exact copies, but they're influenced by the books of the Old Testament. So John had this profound spiritual experience. And sometimes when we have a very deep and profound experience, we turn to metaphors or symbols to describe it, because words fail us. So if somebody's in love, you might say, well, how do you feel? And they say, I'm on the top of a mountain. I'm running through fields of clover or something like this. I'm in love. I feel great. So ask them to put it into words, and they will inevitably turn to some kind of a metaphor, because deep emotional and spiritual experiences cannot really be described with words. And so John chose to use apocalyptic to describe his experience, because he didn't really see something, he experienced something. So when we say he had a vision, he didn't see it like a movie He had a spiritual experience, and that can't really be put into words. So right now I'm going to give you some examples of modern apocalyptic writing so that you will understand what I'm talking about. But first, I want to make a request for you because I wasn't sure whether I was going to do this, but it's so useful. I wanted to share this with you. So these examples of modern apocalyptic writing, I intend to use in a future book. I'm sharing with you right now. I'm sharing them with you right now because I think it's helpful for you. But I'm asking you, please, not to copy them, reproduce them, or share them with anybody because they're not for public use. I want to use them in a book, and I don't want them to be out there in the public domain before they end up in my book, okay? So I'm thanking you in advance for your understanding. Here's the first modern apocalyptic. So this is not in the Bible. This is something that I wrote. You think about it and tell me what event is talking about. These are events that are known to everybody. The crescent moon loomed larger. While the eagle slept, two silver birds flew above the wall and tore into the apple. The great and the small, the finest and the bravest perished. From ashes to ashes, from dust to dust. The bull and the bear stood still as the smoke rose from the twisted steel mountain. Now, what's it about? Unfortunately, I can't see you, but I'm giving you a minute to think about it. And I think most people do get this. This is about 9/11. So I will explain the symbols to you. The crescent moon is the symbol of Islam. It's getting larger, means it's a growing threat. The eagle represents the United States. It's asleep. It means it's not aware of what's happening. Two silver birds are the airplanes. They tore into the apple. New York is called the Big Apple. What does it mean that they flew over the wall? This happened in Lower Manhattan, called Wall Street. The great and the small, the finest and the bravest perished because a lot of people died, people who were, captains of finance industry and people who were janitors and secretaries. The New York's finest are the cops. New York's bravest are the firefighters. And a lot of them, over 200 firefighters and about 50 cops, about, I think, 270 firefighters died. It was a huge number in the towers. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. We all remember seeing the ashes and the pictures of this. And the bull and the bear represent the stock market, which stopped trading for a week. They stood still as the smoke rose from the twisted steel mountain. And that's the image of the wreckage that we all saw, okay? Most people get this. So this is, I didn't say anything about New York. I didn't say Islamic extremists. I didn't say anything I didn't say terrorism. I didn't say anything. You, even if I didn't explain it to you, because we don't have a lot of time, I'm already out of time. Even if I didn't explain it to you, I think you would get this. Let's do another couple. Bang! Fleet Patriot Day feet sped toward the cradle of liberty, counting down the 26. At the tape, two wolves, two blasts, brought Freedom Trail tears. 3 lost, but still strong. This is an event that everybody knew about. It's a time. Now, you would be more likely to get this if you live in New England, or especially in Boston. This is the Boston Marathon bombing. Bang is the start of the starting gun of the marathon. Patriots Day is the day that the marathon is always run. It's the third Monday in April. And Boston, it runs from outside of the city toward this inner city of Boston, and Boston is called the Cradle of Liberty. And the 26 are the number of miles. They're counting down the 26. And the blast, the bombs, 2 bombs went off at the finish line. And the wolf is the symbol of Chechnya. The brothers who set off the blast were from Chechnya. And Boston is famous for the Freedom Trail. It's a red line along the sidewalk. You follow it and it takes you to all these historic places. And afterwards, Boston's motto was Boston Strong. Okay, so again, I feel confident that even though I didn't have the time to ask you to all contribute, you start with one little image and then you kind of unravel the rest of it. This is what I do in class normally. Here's one that I expect you to get. The ring had been smashed. The world watched the red birds gather. Black smoke, black smoke, black smoke, black smoke, white smoke. Then the gaucho appeared, saying, peace and all good. That's the election of Pope Francis. Okay. When the previous Pope dies, they destroy the ring. In the case of Benedict, they didn't actually smash it. They defaced the seal. And then everybody's watching. Who are the red birds? The cardinals, of course. They're the ones who gather. And then the smoke is burning. Blacks, there were 5 ballots. He was elected on the 5th ballot. Black smoke, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the white smoke, everybody knows. This means that a new Pope has been elected. He's the gaucho because he's from Argentina. And peace and all good is the saying of St. Francis, and he took the name Francis, okay? So here again, I didn't say anything about Rome. There was nothing about the Pope, but from the imagery, you understand what it's depicting, right? I think there's one more. Okay, here's one more, this one. Half were with her, but half wanted to make America great again. So now you already know what direction to go. Confident anticipation of the 270, but tears, disbelief, and dismay when the keystone finally fell. The orange elephant told the white donkey, you're fired. Okay. Okay, so this, of course, is the election of 2016. Half were with her because Hillary Clinton's motto was, I'm with her, right? Half wanted to make America great again. That was Trump's motto. The Clinton camp was very confident that they would reach 270. That's the number of electoral votes needed. But as the evening went on, they couldn't believe it. You see, there were pictures of them crying, etc. And the state that really put Trump's election over the edge, over the top, was Pennsylvania, the Keystone state. And then, of course, he's an elephant. He's a Republican, orange because of the orange color of his face sometimes. And the donkey is white because Hillary Clinton was wearing white, and she was expected to she expected herself to make a victory, speech, and all in white because that was the image of, she was supposed to be, or she thought she would be the first female president. And that was the color she was wearing in honor of the suffragettes, because that was their color. And of course, Trump would say on his show, The Apprentice, you're fired, right? Okay, so I went, so please, I want to remind you, I hope you enjoyed those little examples, but please don't copy them and please don't use them. I really need to use them in a book. Okay, so thank you very much. So I went a bit over, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
It went by very fast. Yes, Maria.
Thank you so much. That was so informative and such a wonderful way to illustrate, just to illustrate what apocalyptic is. I think we just have a couple of, in the Q&A box. First of all, the person is asking, when you refer to the book of Revelation, could you quote the chapter and verses so they know what you're talking about? I mean, tonight was just a general, but I'm assuming that in the future
Absolutely.
And
I will actually be putting the text on the screen also when we go forward.
Good.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And just there's one question. Could you clarify which John was on?
We're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
That's what we have to talk. One of the things we have to talk about is why there's a different of opinion, but that's going to happen next week when we talk about authorship.
All right. So stay tuned. This was a wonderful start to what I think is going to be a terrific course. So thank you all for coming. Good night. And Jeannie, God bless you. And I hope the weather in San Diego's not too rainy. I think you're getting some different weather out there.
I think you guys have it worse where you are. So anyway, good night, everybody. See you next week.
Good night, everybody. Take care. See you next week. And remember, everything is recorded. So in case you want to listen to something again, you can go to the Spirit Alive YouTube page where Matthew, our tech, will load all of the recordings. But it takes, give them about 72 hours, okay? Good night, everyone.